Welcome to It's a Controls Problem, where we do precision guesswork based upon unreliable data given to us by those of questionable knowledge. I'm your host, Charles Johnson. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Charles Johnson, host of It's a Controls Problem. I'm here with Matthew Vandenberg. How's it going, Matthew?
It's good, thank you.
And we're here with a special guest today. He's the Director of Smart Buildings at the QuestCom Group, Mr. John Albanese. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Matt. Happy to be here.
Okay, so John, why don't you give yourself an introduction of who you are? I know you and Matthew have been talking quite a bit, but we have not been really introduced. So, and as well as really the guests, the audience of the podcast. So, go ahead and give yourself an introduction.
Sure. Thanks, Charles. Been in the industry since about 1999. Started as a commercial refrigeration, I will say, grunt. Armaflex and glue was my intro into the industry. Progressed into HVAC, maintenance, became a service tech, wrenched on boilers, chillers, rooftops. Got into leadership 2005. And I've been kind of on the operational side of the business since then.
So, so what actually drew you to this particular field? So, I know that you started in the world of HVACR and then eventually in smart building. So, what was that key step to bring you in?
Yeah, great question. Honestly, I was graduating high school, had no idea what I actually wanted to do. I was not a college kid, and I knew that. And so I got into kind of the world of CNC machining. My dad owned a welding supply and industrial gases business, and he had contacts, and I was looking for a job, and I was doing the second shift, third shift, CNC machining centers, drinking a 12-pack of Mountain Dew overnight, just trying to stay awake. Had no clue. The oddest story, I was working for a company here in Milwaukee, and during my break time, I took a forklift, and I decided to pick up the back end of my Toyota pickup truck to inspect the exhaust system because I heard a weird noise. And lo and behold, the third shift supervisor was kind of cruising by and saw this happen. And needless to say, that next morning, I was out of a job. So that point in time, I was married. My son was probably months from being born. And my mother-in-law did daycare out of the house. And one of the dads that picked his kids up every night worked for a commercial refrigeration company here in Milwaukee and just said, hey, we're looking for a yard guy, right? Someone who just picks up after the job, gets into glue, does some Armaflex. And I said, yeah, what the heck? Knew nothing about it. I will tell you, shortly after being on a job site in commercial refrigeration, I was just absolutely enamored with what really happens behind the scenes in a grocery store. So spent my time, doing the Armaflex and the glue thing. Started staying late, brazing pipe, trying to better understand the refrigeration cycle. The racks, receivers, condensers, and I fell in love, and that was really the end of it. Shortly thereafter, I started with an HVAC company, and that introduced me to the world of HVAC, right? So we're talking chillers, boilers, rooftops, the whole gamut, install service. And I was hooked, absolutely hooked.
So was that environmental systems?
Yep, the old ESI. So I started with them in about 99. Kind of had a little bit of a horrid history. I was a boomeranger, as they call it. So I did the refrigeration thing, started with them, went back to the refrigeration thing, joined a union outfit for a bit, and ultimately ended up back at ESI in 2002. And that's kind of where like the whole history of it kind of starts.
So you worked your way up, and you had, you gained this comprehensive understanding of business operations. So, can you share a pivotal experience or a project during those years that shaped your expertise in building systems and controls?
So I did a lot of mechanical HVAC stuff, right? I was put through the Niagara R2 certification, passed that. They wanted me to be a junior engineer. And quite honestly, that was not my bailiwick, right? Like, I didn't get behind being in a laptop, writing commands, and I was more hands on. I was more behind the scenes. I was more about, like, how do we get this stuff behind the scenes to run better so that the engineers have a better chance of doing the work the way it was actually designed and being successful for our clients. So, like, if you want a fun story, I'll tell you about the first lawn job we did back in like 2005, where we reused the Train 18.2 wire that was provided, and it turned into a total nightmare and cost us twice the amount to actually get it up once we then started pulling lawn cable. So I mean, there's a lot of horrid stories over the years. I mean, you've been in this long enough. Matthew's been in this long enough. Like, we've probably seen it all. But the ones and zeros guy, I am not.
Yeah, I mean, lawn, especially hilarious enough. There was a seminar today about lawn and where they think where lawn is actually going. So that was interesting. We can have an aside on that later. The troubleshooting lawn networks. Yeah, did my fair share of that. The worst story I had was um, we didn't use shielded wire going to and from VAVs to hit a VFD, and so every VFD that was running just took the just destroyed networks. But going behind,
Right.
like even then, like going behind lawn installations because it's free topology. Um, everyone's like, well, we'll just wire however we want to wire, herp derp. Whatever is easiest for me is how I'll go. And then you try to go behind, and you're like, what the hell happened here? Yeah,
Right.
it can get terrible and very costly for sure. Um,
Yep.
so doing since I'm doing a little Google foo already. So after ESI, you became the vice president of operations at CBRE, correct?
Yeah. So Paul Oswald was not the original owner of ESI. ESI was founded in 1986 by a gentleman named Jim Elowicki, who kind of he was a bit of a forward-thinking individual. Our first control line was the old Stafa product, and he came from a mechanical contractor that thought that pneumatics would actually last forever, which in some aspects there's probably a lot of pneumatics out there, and that's not half wrong. But he started ESI, Jim did, and we were a Stafa dealer. Paul Oswald bought the organization back in 2003, I believe, and introduced us to Niagara. There was probably 4 or 5 years of do we continue with being a mechanical contractor, or do we focus in on being an MSI? Paul's philosophy was you can go to the yellow pages. And for anyone listening who's unfamiliar with the yellow pages, that was a directory of companies that was hard copied that you could pick from, right? And in the Milwaukee area, there was probably 50 mechanical contractors, right? So Paul had the vision to go, you know what, we're going to do something that no one's done. We're going to be an MSI, Master Systems Integrator, and we're going to integrate buildings, systems that were never designed to talk to each other. And so we dropped the mechanical contracting portion of the business and really focused in on what is this Niagara R2 thing and how can we help our clients aggregate their buildings into, combined systems that work for them and not against them. So through the years, like I said earlier, I think 2008 or 9, we became one of the first Sky Foundry users, Sky Spark. We were completely out of the mechanical contracting business, and we were just doing our thing locally, so southeastern Wisconsin, but also nationally, having some prominent retailers that we had worked with. And then 2015 was the year that CBRE had purchased or acquired ESI. And their reason for acquiring us was to really digitalize how FM was done. And so I think at that period, I was director of operations, and with the new company, I became the VP of operations. But I was essentially running our project management teams, the design teams, the engineers, overseeing panel construction, shipping, receiving, kind of everything post sales.
Yeah, I've had experience with a couple of CBRE branches in South Carolina and the Maryland, D.C., Virginia area. I mean, CBRE is absolutely huge. And actually, I've had a great experience with every single interaction I've had with CBRE has been nothing but stellar. The people that CBRE hires, pretty sharp. And so there's a lot. They do a lot. Each of them. Like a lot of the engineers I've seen, they're pretty good with their systems, which definitely is appreciative, especially when you're going in afterwards and trying to either add on to their existing job, or you're doing a brand new renovation. Those people have a really good wide range of expertise. And this leads me to my next question. So speaking of your specialties in your wide range of areas, from mechanical to electrical and power metering, what do you think? Which areas do you believe are most critical for like a smart building deployment, and why?
Well, again, I'm probably going to be the anti of most of the conversation that you all have had. But when it relates to a smart building, like understanding what makes a smart building is kind of in the eye of the beholder, right? So from a client's perspective, a smart building is, you have gadgets and automation, but I would say that a smart building is defined by the client's purpose. Like what do they do and what makes it smart? And at the end of the day, does it help the client do what their business does? Right? So does it help them put more boxes out the door? Does it help them help more patients? There's a lot of mystery around smart buildings. Is it technology? Is it like the gadgets, the software, the hardware? I think it's a combination of all of those, but a truly smart building should be defined by the actual client. And I think that's kind of what a lot of the industry is missing as we talk about smart buildings.
In your experience, what areas that of production or implementation of these systems where you find that you find it more beneficial?
Yeah, that's a good question, Charles. And I'll actually go back to like something I've really believed over the years is the integrated project delivery methodology, right? So in the design build world, and I'll stay away from the plan and spec stuff because that's a whole probably separate long topic. But in the design build world, where you can actually sit down with a client and go, okay, what is the problem? Like, what are you struggling with? And they're able to like tell you, here's where we're having problems. We have, buildings across a vast geographical area. We've acquired systems. We have no idea what they're doing, how they're running. Like, how can you help? I think when you're able to have those honest conversations and bring in trusted partners to help craft the solution, you not only win tons of awards with that client for just the transparency, the trust that is built in that process, but on the backside, you actually have a building that really works, or a series of buildings that work, talk to each other, and work to benefit the client.
That's we've spoken about it on a couple of different podcasts about being that trusted advisor, to the customer. And I think in your situation, I think it's really important, especially as you're coming in, um, as as more of the on the management side, right? Like they're trusting you to make sure that things are implemented appropriately to give them the maximum results.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, trust is really built on three things. It's transparency, it's empathy, and it's consistency. That's the three things that you build trust with a client. If you can check those boxes, understand where they're coming from, where they want to go, provide consistency, so systems that are reliable and consistent and work, and just connect with them, right? You're there for them. If you can do that, that's where that whole design build, and the integrated project delivery really, really works out well.
Yeah, for me, I've always found design build kind of more difficult, especially from being a controls contractor, because it's um, while we're supposed to be the experts of everything, I think there are so many aspects of design build that maybe not aren't necessarily considered, especially from the control side, that really need to be implemented more. The mechanical, electrical, and the control side are all equally as important. And it does require great coordination among all the groups in order to implement, I think, the best product from a design build perspective versus regular like plan and spec. Um, and so I know now that you work. So now you're the director of smart buildings for the QuestCom Group. So I don't really know anything about the QuestCom Group. So can you elaborate on what the QuestCom Group is?
Yeah. Ending my CBRE career, one of the contractors that we had used, one of the partners we had was QuestCom. So if you've been in the industry for any amount of time, you understand the importance of the installation, right? So you can have the best engineers, the best hardware, the best software. If it's not deployed the correct way, when your engineers get on site, or the programs that they had pre-written, all of it just goes to hell in a handbasket because the installation just was not up to par. So in my time with CBRE, I had worked with QuestCom. They were a partner that provided the installation. They were licensed and still are licensed in 37 states across the U.S. So using them was kind of like hitting the easy button. They were transparent. They were consistent. All the things that breeds trust is what they were. So when my time ended with CBRE, I received a call from my friends at QuestCom, and they kind of said, "Hey, can you help us with this whole smart buildings thing?" And afterwards, you sit around, you think about it, and you're like, "All right, I was the VP of operations for one of the top FM companies in the country. What am I going to do next?" And it really came down to, I think that there's enough controls companies out there, mechanical contractors out there, general contractors out there that could benefit from having a team of individuals that understand low voltage, understand technology, BMS. These guys were legit, right? They were wire sharking out the comm trunks. They were Johnny on the spot as it relates to being there for startup and commissioning. Like they were just a super, super group of individuals. And, I said, hey, like we can provide this to the entire industry. And there's so many MSIs out there that don't do their own installs. And when they're in a new town, the client says, hey, use Jimmy's Electrical because they're who we use for everything else. And it turns into a nightmare because they don't know shielding, they don't know comm trunks, they don't know like the colors of the wires, how to terminate the controllers. And then once they're done, they're just gone, right? So QuestCom is the anti of that, in that they were just the best of the best that I had worked with in my 25 plus year career. So that's where I decided to go.
I think that's, you hit the nail on the head. When you're dealing with contractors, there are good contractors and there are bad contractors. Let's say you have 3 Honeywell vendors in that, that you could deal with, but only one of them is spectacular and the other two are just kind of like two men in a truck, and they're just, humming along, just trying to slam in jobs and get paid, where you have the other people that definitely think about that next level of controls. Like you said, they're using Wireshark, and I know a lot of people who still don't use Wireshark, right? Like I mean, like I have an oscilloscope. I mean, I don't do any controls work anymore from that perspective since I work for a vendor. But like having those kinds of tools, it definitely separates the men from the boys. So now, as the director, what are the new challenges or opportunities that you're focusing on specifically in the smart building space?
I mean, one of the other attractive things about QuestCom is that, so in 2001, they were primarily like how they were started. They were a telecom kind of company, right? So they did phone systems, fiber. Over the years, through a lot of organic growth, they've developed into a full-scale electrical contractor, in that they can do anything from the transformer into the building. So having these teams that one could do electrical work, two, they have persons who are versed in fire systems, IP systems, networking, OT, IT, whatever you want to call it these days. Um, they're just a very eclectic group of individuals. And, if you can go into a client and say, hey, like you're going to have one throat to choke. Like we could do the fire protection, we could do the access control, we could do the IP video stuff, we could do the IT/OT stuff. Like, and oh, by the way, like either we could do the BMS or we could find a partner that has the BMS and do that install. Like that's kind of a unicorn in the industry today. And that was one of the other reasons that really drew me to QuestCom.
So it's about about finding the best people for the best solution that you have.
Correct. Absolutely. No, I was just going to say, like one of the great things is it's not an all or nothing proposition with QuestCom, right? If you want just a fire system, great, they can do a fire system. If you just need cameras put in, you're going to have a network hub that's going to take the cameras in, and you're going to put them wherever the client wants them, whether it's their cloud or the vendor cloud. That's great too. So that's what was also appealing, is that it wasn't an all or nothing proposition with QuestCom. Like they are flexible enough to be able to take care of a client and provide them what they need to make their buildings run better.
I actually really like that idea of, you don't need to be the provider of everything. You want to be the best provider of what the customer wants. And I think that's a really smart way to look at it, because I know that there are some companies that'll go out there and they're like, oh yeah, we want to do everything. Well, does the customer really want everything? Like, no, like right now they may be good on this part, but now they want this part. And you're like, well, we're really good at here, but not good. Well, so that's not, it doesn't make the best fit. But where you excel is that you have the expertise in all, in all the aspects that a customer may need. And you're just like, hey, here's your menu. Select what you want. You can go a la carte.
Right.
And then at that particular point, the customer's like, I'll take XYZ, and you're like, oh, here you go. And I think that's a really, really smart decision. Some people try to do entirely too much, and I think that when you spread yourself thin, that's where you really kind of like expose those cracks, in your system. So I really think that's super smart. I've never really thought about it that way, but I think that's a really great solution that you can provide. That's added value to the customer. So with some other smart building deployments that you have, or what you've seen among your career, like what are some of the common pitfalls that you've observed, or what do you feel that needs to be improved or implemented within this industry for greater success?
Well, that's a deep question, Charles. I don't know if we've got enough time in this podcast to cover it all, but really, it starts with like clarity. There's like the way that people approach buildings. There's so much obscurity around what they actually want to accomplish. There's so much industry noise related to AI, hardware, software. People have buildings and they have resources that are stretched thin, and they really just want to optimize both of those. Like, how can we do it cheaper and you save my people from having to work, 60 hours a week? And the problem is that we overcomplicate everything in this industry because we're not really listening. I think we hear and we're trained to respond, but we're not actually listening to what the clients want. So, the whole approach of I think it was Stephen Covey, that really talked about, you have two ears and one mouth, right? For a reason. And from sales through execution, there's gaps internally, not even on the client side, right? You can say the client didn't know what they wanted. They didn't truly understand what they were going to get. But at the end of the day, in that sales cycle, which is long in the tooth for our industry, 12 to 18 months is probably the average. There's just so many gaps in how do we scope it? Do we really understand what the clients want? And then we go deploy it, and we give a 2-paragraph write-up to our ops teams to go design it, install it, engineer it, and then service it afterwards. And at the end of the day, 80% of the time, it's probably not exactly what the client wanted. I mean, that's just the obscene truth to how the industry needs to get better.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Um, asking asking more questions, I think, really will go a long way. I recently saw an estimate, and what I'm trying to, what I have found more often than not is that the customer may end up being unhappy, but did we as the experts ask all the questions, right? Because we don't know what the customer doesn't know, right? Like that's the big thing. But that's on to me. That's on that should be on us to ask as much as possible to make sure that we lead them in the right direction. Now, sometimes we may not even know exactly what they're trying to convey. English is hard, right? Like, so what you may think you're conveying versus what they actually understand, I think are two completely different things. And so, how do you think that we need to focus more on those particular questions to get to that end result that ensures that the customer gets exactly what he wants?
Yeah, not to oversimplify it, but defining the problem up front is probably something that is not done enough, right? So customer says, I want this, that, and the other thing. and we just go, okay, here's a price. But we haven't actually, whether there's not a relationship or, be it design build or it's bid spec. I was listening to one of the other podcasts you guys had done, and it was kind of like revolved around specifications that were from the 90s, maybe, where they still want, a workstation and a dot printer, whatever the hell it was. The consultants and the designers and the MEP firms that are out there, like I get that they're probably asked to do a lot with minimal from the clients, but it's like the specifications that actually do make it out there are just so vague, because part of the issue is, and this is probably a whole nother tyrant that we could spend an hour on, is that the folks doing construction don't talk to the folks that are actually running the buildings. They don't talk to the folks who are in sustainability, and they don't talk to the IT people. So it is an absolute cluster screw. When you get a specification, you want to do your best work and put your best foot forward, and you have to be cost conscious, but you're not allowed to ask questions. You can put questions into a format which are probably read by somebody in procurement who goes, I have no idea. So I'm not answering it, or, bid it the way it was written.
Yeah.
I think on the design build side, you have the opportunity to be that consultant to that end client and bring the parties together and have a more educated conversation. But that is probably on the bid spec side, that is probably the biggest failure. And I don't know even who to blame it on. We're all probably part of the blame because we tolerate it. But it's difficult to provide a solid project when you're dealing in abstract.
Yeah, I think that's really I think that's an advantage that design build has versus versus like true plan and spec, because I actually just finished a PDH course on specifications, and one thing I do touch on is how dated things are, that people just copy and paste from things that they have because they're too lazy to write one from scratch to get into the modern times, and they're like, well, this is good enough, slam it in here and move forward, and all of a sudden you're like, who the hell has done dot matrix in years? Like the I dealt with I'll tell you, when it comes to specification, one that really pissed me off was, it was a jail in South Carolina. Now, first off, jails in South Carolina, not that you were expecting any kind of quality anyway, because, well, it's South Carolina, but the
Right.
but this particular one, it was built where civilization ends. Like you think civilization ended there? No, go about 10 more miles and it's lawless out there. Well, this specification had didn't really talk about smoke control. However, there was a lot of smoke control around. So all of a sudden, people were trying to bid smoke control, some weren't bidding smoke control, and the specification, like I said, really didn't touch on it. And so, the salesman asked me, like, well, what do you think about it? I was like, I don't touch it. Like, we're not, no one's really asking about it. But all of a sudden now, that led to a bid variance of like 250 grand. Like, we were
Oh yeah.
250 grand lower. And so all of a sudden, like, we got the job. And so it was like, sorry, you guys doing smoke control? Nope, nope. That was not talked about at all. And they're like, well, we kind of expected it to be there. Well, it's not here. So,
Yep.
that's gonna be a change order. And that really was a hard row of hoe to even get, to even get close. And we kind of just like, look, halfway, you know, we'll meet you here, but you gotta come to that. And at that point, like, it's like, look, engineers have to do their job to do the specification, and I think that's where you guys excel, because you're like, you know what, we're just gonna get everyone in a room. and we're just going to talk about it. And then we're going to have another conversation, maybe at some point, and then you continue to have that, and your project can continuously evolve into something that's truly a work, a working piece of art versus just kind of like, a Mr. Potato Head that gets put together and it's called a building and a control system.
No, I think you're absolutely correct. In that, when you look at a specification today, to like between all of the different divisions, there's references of who touches what when, and like quite honestly, like one of the like cool things of AI that I think it would make this better is the ability to like read through an entire specification and understand like where does the mechanical spec touch the electrical spec, touch the MSI spec, because no one's reading through a thousand pages of these specifications. And so you put your best foot forward, like, okay, I've got the drawings, I see the notes on the drawings, I believe I understand what we're responsible for. And then you're like, oh, wait, like I don't have rated controllers for smoke control. And then everyone kind of takes a step back and go, well, how did we get here? And at the end of the day, the client is like, I paid the developer who paid the general contractor who paid you guys. So figure it out. It's no more money on us. And then so we all scratch our heads and knock our heads and, eventually try to figure out, okay, how do we actually give them the scope that they paid for and not lose our pants, which is extremely difficult.
So let's for the audience at large, can you define what design build is and what the advantages are over that versus just like true plan and spec?
Yeah, true design build is when you have a relationship with a client, or you're part of a team that has a relationship with a client, and they go, hey, we want to do X, Y, and Z. And they go, okay, like all of the vendors are pre-approved based on knowledge, book pricing, whatever you want to call it. And people actually get in a room and go, hey, we're going to build a building. It's going to be 50,000 square foot, 100,000 square foot, 1,000,000 square foot. And here's what we wanted to do. Hey,
that's to me. That's what it sounds like. That sounds like a bid room right there of a plan and spec right there.
Yeah,
a bunch of dogs.
yeah, exactly. That's the epitome of bid and spec. There, you got a couple of dogs getting after each other. But it's built on trust, and it's built on the relationship, and it's built on the client and the partners being the best in the business and understanding that smart buildings in general are not easy to put together. There's no two buildings that are exactly alike, right? Like I've been through enough of these where client says to us, hey, we've got 100 buildings across the US. They're all identical. I go, really? Right? Like, okay. So now you have to form up some like assumptions, because sending a solutions architect out to 100 buildings, in the middle of summer is probably not the best way to approach it. It's the best way to collect all of the real information that you probably need. But sometimes these buildings, you can use assumptions, and you go back and go, hey, this is what we've experienced. This is what we've seen in similar deployments. And then, okay, who do we partner with? That's probably the hardest part, in that if you're a national provider of smart buildings, you have to go to Utah and find someone that can install the system. Or you got to find a partner that can get there quick enough at a reasonable enough cost to make the project still happen. So there's a lot of challenges around it, but I think when you actually sit down as a team, right, as the different disciplines, and go, here's what we're up to, here's what you're up to, you've had the clarity of understanding what the actual problem is that you're trying to solve for that client, and the client's in the room. I just think it's a way better approach than wing dinging, plan and spec out to 10 different vendors for each one of those trades. And then you don't know who's doing what. It's like going back to the who's on first, what's on second.
So with what do you? I know that you touched a little bit about it, but what has been your worst experience from a design build perspective?
That the projects take long to put together, and then by the time you actually go to deploy them, the client stakeholders have flipped, and you're dealing with a whole new subset of persons that weren't part of that build, and they have different thoughts and different aspirations for the project. But you're already contractually going, so you have some like people to win over at that point.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably hard, because you can almost at times feel like you're going to be hitting a moving target at that point.
Yeah, it's you know it's really difficult to say because you can have a project go in design build go quick, right? Like less than 6 months. They understand what their problems are. The right people have been brought to the table. You have the client IT team there, right? So that doesn't become a 6 month hurdle right there, and you get it done. Uh, Sometimes it's just being able to articulate to the stakeholders, the new stakeholders on the project, why we're doing what we're doing, and kind of give them the history of how we got to where we are. And they could choose to blow it up, but 9 times out of 10, once they understand the why and like what promise it has for their buildings, their teams, helps them focus on what they do best. Like they want to look good in front of their C-suite persons as well. So they typically jump on board, but it does take like conversations, and you got to rebuild the trust.
What has been your favorite project to do? I mean, you don't need to talk about like a client, but like maybe maybe a general. Trying to think of how I want to say this. Like, what do you think your favorite type of project has been? Where it's like you worked with a design build and you're like, man, this was a really good project. Like, you really got excited about it.
Yeah, so that's kind of brings up a lot of heartache, a lot of happiness, and a lot of just general emotion. But we started with a large e-commerce client back in 2017. It started with a couple of pilot buildings. We did a great job deploying it. It was a mix of integrate existing, add net new controls. It was all Niagara on top. And in about the course of 5 years, we went from 3 buildings to over 700 buildings. Our team expanded from 135 to about 250. And revenues went from about 18 million to about 50, 60 million. And when that happens, you're literally, people say we go into fight or flight mode, right? Well, we did only one of those. We fought our way out of it. And one of the biggest keys to making that a success was really just how we hired. We hired on two philosophies, really: attitude and aptitude. If they were smart enough to do the job and they were a good person, we knew they would fit. We spent years kind of perfecting. We would go like to colleges, whether it was Milwaukee School of Engineering, Ferris State, and we would interview and do an intern program for kids in their sophomore, junior year, and we really established a cadence of we bring new folks in, we train them, we match them with teams that we knew they would fit well in, and kids out of college, and maybe kids is the poor choice for a podcast here, but like they wanted to see the world. They would learn. They were smart enough to learn the engineering. They had the best attitudes, and they would go out and they would learn. They would do startups. Eventually, they would be leads themselves, doing projects and bringing in the next group. And probably in our industry, the biggest or hardest thing when you're doing national work is the travel. And at some point, they get a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or they're married, they have a kid, and all of a sudden they don't want to be on that roster of travel. So then you have to transition those folks into kind of quasi leadership roles where, okay, like you're going to be responsible for a team of people or a client, and you're going to have to bring up these younger persons that we're bringing through. And over the course of 7, 8 years, we just absolutely killed it in that approach. And we had the best of the best designers, the best of the best engineers. Clients were just extremely pleased with how we dealt with adversity and how we finished projects under excruciating tight timelines. And you both know that we are the last in the buildings, right? When you get a controls project, like I've got people asking me like, hey, is this going to be up and running by Friday? And I'm going like, you don't even have power to your rooftops. Like no, like I know you don't want to hear that, but that's the honest answer. But it was just the resilience of the people doing the projects from the time it got handed over from our sales teams, got into our design queue. We built systems, we built process, like work streams. We augmented them when they didn't work. It was just truly amazing to be a part of a group of individuals that loved what they did. Some of them learned to love, right? Because they were fresh out of school and those kids don't really know what they want to do. But we provided an environment that was, stretched them mentally, physically, and it was rewarding when we were done. So that's probably a super long answer to a very distinct question of a particular project, but it was really that entire interaction over a 5 to 8 year period.
No, it was a really great. I mean, that was a really great answer. What was underneath the Niagara hood? Was a lot of disc tech?
It was a lot of integrated equipment. It was disc tech where we needed the I/O. It was Schneider where we needed a conversion to a generator, EGX. That's primarily it. It wasn't that it was overcomplicated or difficult. It was just in the quantity. And, when you're talking about our engineers literally built robots within the Niagara environment to overnight, do commissioning. Right. We'd hand the commissioning agent kind of a report that said, here's what passed, here's what failed, just based on the bot that they wrote that overnight would start up the equipment, measure deltas during cooling, heating, economizing. Very basic, but rooftop, centric. These guys were just brilliant. Like some of them were just stupid brilliant. And what they came up with to make their work easier was just insane. So, I mean, kudos to those guys. And we just sit there and we just awe at what they came up with. And when a commissioning agent gets a full report and their job like literally gets cut in half, they're kind of giving high fives behind the scenes of like, you don't know how long it would take to like literally go out and test 150 rooftops on a site. And under the extreme deadlines that we were under, that's kind of how we pulled a lot of these jobs out of our ass, quite frankly, is that the engineers just did their thing. And they were just consistent and they were intelligent and they knew how to build. We had developers in Niagara, we had developers on the app dev side. They worked together really, really well. And it was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, for those for those listening, when he's talking about robots, he's talking about something called a provisioning robot. And so, what a robot does, or what a robot can do, it's a Java program. It's one program, or you can have multiple if you want, but you can set them up to perform different tasks. Like he mentioned, commissioning. One I just recently wrote was to add a folder of logic to controllers, and then actually that link that logic folder to to control points. So instead of taking days to do something, now it is done within hours or even minutes. So provisioning robots can be a little. I think that's probably. I think they're extremely difficult to build. And you have to have some smart people who really know what they're doing. So that's awesome. The fact that that you have people that could implement things like that. And those are the cream of the crop that people that I think a lot of controls companies, if they had just like one or two people like that, each, then there would be I think there'd be so many more successful projects that get that again that get implemented. But a lot of that it requires, I think, a real like a real it's a real it requires a real different kind of person, right? Because like you can have someone who's really good mechanical but not really good with a computer, and vice versa. Like you need someone, like your company, you need people that can like sit there and write a program or a sequence, but then go and then actually work on their TXV that same night.
Yeah, no, just on that point, it's really, the legacy ESI people that kind of made it through that acquisition that CBRE did in 2015, including myself. Like, we were very mechanically inclined, right? So we understood how chillers, boilers, rooftops, all of those components of HVAC worked. And there was just amazing relationships that were built between the legacy persons and the new persons coming in. There's a high level of trust, and we were able to spin those new brilliant engineers up in a way that they weren't afraid when they got in trouble or didn't understand something. They weren't afraid to ask the question. They didn't, granted this was 10 years ago, they didn't have AI to quick ask a question. They literally picked up the phone or texted or shot an email. And the veterans that understood those systems and control systems, like, again, I'm not a programmer, I don't pretend to be,
Yeah.
but I understand the correlations between mechanical equipment and the programs that they're trying to write. So that collaboration internally just reproduced awesome results that, these individuals today are now probably in their mid 30s, early 40s, and they're the geniuses in this industry that, are doing the cool things that, are going to bridge the gaps of AI and ML to what building automation is today and the equipment that it controls.
Yeah, I'm 42 myself. I grew up in a very unique way in controls, starting out really young, and being kind of immersed in it really most of my life. So I've you and I have both seen the old school way and the new school way, and some of the new school people definitely need to learn the old school way, and those old school people, well, they're just set in their ways, and they don't want to deal with that, and that's fine. Like, because what I like to do is I like to put those two together, and having them learn from one another. Like, okay, cool, well, now the old school guy can really kind of show the new school guy ways, like this is how we did it before, and now they can come up with a fresh set of eyes and be like, okay, well, what if we tried something this way? And even with like younger people, like I tell people now, like, look, if you aren't breaking anything, you aren't trying. Like, you definitely
Right.
need to be
Absolutely.
you definitely need to be out there and working on it in order to become successful. You can't just expect to go out there and just hit home runs and home runs and home runs. You can't. You're going to fumble and you're going to miss the ball. Like, you're going to fall so hard. However, those are the times where, like, you know what? I won't do that again. Like some of those painful things, you need to like we obviously we want to protect people, but like some of those painful, uh, painful scenarios that happen, you need to let happen because otherwise, it doesn't really. I think they don't. Those are the ones that like really shape you to be like, okay, now I know how how this it could go every single time. So now I can work around that to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, I mean, failure is the best teacher, right?
Yep.
Obviously, you want it to be done in more of a controlled environment where
Hmm.
you're not shutting an entire building down.
Yep.
I remember, back in the days of being on a roof and you got hit with 480 and you did a couple barrel rolls and you thank God that you weren't touching metal when you got hit. But who knew that crankcase heater was actually on the line side, not the load side, right? So I only made that mistake once.
But one last question I have. What's been your favorite control system to work on in your time? What do you what do you have a soft spot for?
Yeah. So I was listening to a few of your podcasts earlier, and that question came up, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to think about this. And really, I'm not a ones and zeros kind of guy. And so I know that like our engineers love Distech, they love Niagara. Those two are like uber compatible, a similar programming. But I was going to revert back to the old days where it was our Stafa controllers. And as a technician, you had this little handheld device with a phone cord that you would plug into the controllers, the MS-1800s or the fan coil controllers. And if you knew enough to be dangerous, you could turn things on and off. And that's probably as a tech back in those days, I could test. You change out filters, belts, whatever maintenance you were doing. You could start the equipment back up. You can verify it was working. It was solid stuff. It developed into the Talon product, and that kind of did what it did. And but yeah, that's probably other than the engineers. Like I said, love
Yeah.
Distech, love Niagara. For me personally, it was probably the old Stafa stuff that I could actually manipulate on my own. Now, as you can say, there's like clients out there still today that, believe it or not, whether it's pneumatics or those the old DDC systems, they're still out there, right? And every now and then we'll like get a call that someone says, "Hey, I have an old DMS system. Like, can you work on it?" And we're like, "We don't even have laptops anymore that still have that programming."
Yeah, with Ultimus.
Like, we'd be you get the one guy in like the office that has this old XP computer that he's stashed in his van for the past 10 years that hasn't been probably charged in the same amount of time. And like, hey, we could send him out and see if he can help. But the reality is, we need to sit down and have a conversation of what your strategy is going forward. And they're like, oh, do we really? Yep.
Yes.
Because, the stuff's gone. It's just gone.
Yeah, they don't make them like they used to. I've told people this before. That control systems were designed for the lifetime of the building originally, and that's not the case anymore. Parts
No.
parts go away, and future proofing your building is really important. And I know that like some people have heartburn because of the money that was spent before, but the amount of money that you're going to spend continuing to put band-aids on the building, you could already put a new system in place. Um,
Yeah.
it's really
That
important to
that
get
whole
across.
like riding that line of like, is there an ROI or do I just have to do it? Is probably the most difficult conversation because you literally work in um, fantasy land and come up with ROIs, and the reality is can you actually get by without doing anything, right? Like growing up in the trades, you figure out anything can be controlled with a transformer and a relay, right? Like that's just the way it goes. But that's not the right answer. I mean, that gets you by, but having conversations with clients about long term and hey, what's your capex, what's your opex, like what can we do to make the building run better, and then just getting their buy-in and honestly just being a trusted advisor to them, and not just a vendor, not just a contractor, but becoming a partner is where the industry needs to go. And honestly, it's difficult, right? When you have procurement and people have perceptions of what's going on, it's extremely difficult. But I truly believe just building trust, client trust, team trust, like that's where our industry has to mesh and get better in order for the technologies and the cool stuff that is coming out to be deployed and actually make a difference.
No, it's really really well said, and I can't. Yeah, I mean, never spoke truer words there. It's all true. It's all valid. Um, people just need to understand it. Really, there. But John, thank you very much for being on the show. You've been a pleasure to have. Love seeing the dogs in the background. I'm a dog lover myself, so when I heard the squeaky toys, I was like, oh yes, doggos. Sometimes I prefer them over humans. But yeah, no, really big thanks for you to take the time out of your day to be on the show. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate being invited. Like I said, I'm a big podcast guy, and to come on a podcast now, I feel like this is like the pinnacle here. So I don't know where I'm going to go from here, but no, I truly appreciate Matthew reaching out and Charles, you and your involvement during this chat.
All right, well, that's all we have for this episode. Remember to stay curious and build your team by design. I'm Charles.
And I'm Matthew.
And this has been It's a Controls Problem. Okay. All right, let's try that.
We're pros, John.